I was standing in the middle of a gas station in Memphis, Tennessee, with my hands against the hot hood of my car and a police officer's knee digging into my back while his partner shouted something about resisting arrest that I still don't fully remember. The fluorescent lights above the pumps were burning into my retinas. I could taste the asphalt in my mouth. And I was thinking one clear, terrible thought. This is how my life ends. Not with a bang, but with a humiliation so complete that no amount of explaining would ever wash it away. Except that's not how it ended at all. 6 months later, I was the one wearing the robe. But let me back up, because the gas station wasn't the beginning of anything. It was the exclamation point on a sentence that had been written long before, in smaller letters, in moments I didn't think mattered. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm a black man in his early 40s, and I worked, as a financial advisor for a mid-sized firm downtown. I had a house on Hickory Ridge Drive, a 2018 Toyota Camry with leather seats I'd saved 3 years to buy, a mortgage I paid on time, and what I thought was a clean record. I had a wife named Diane for 14 years before she decided my salary wasn't climbing fast enough and left me for a contractor who paid cash for everything. I had an ex-wife and a daughter named Zoe, who I saw every other weekend, and a routine so predictable you could set a watch by it. My mornings started at 5:30. I'd make a pot of cold brew the night before, and in the morning I'd pour it over ice and stand at my kitchen window watching the neighborhood wake up. The Johnsons' dog barking, the sound of a garbage truck 3 blocks over, Mrs. Chen next door watering her garden in her bathrobe. There was something sacred about those 30 minutes. The world wasn't asking anything of me yet. I was just a man with a good cup of coffee and nowhere I had to be for another hour. Work was solid. I had a decent salary, benefits, a 401k that was growing the way it was supposed to. My boss, Richard Hartley, was the kind of older white man who prided himself on not seeing color, which meant he treated everyone with the exact same corporate indifference. I'd been passed over for 2 promotions I definitely qualified for, but I'd learned not to make noise about it. There was always next year. There was always time. Zoe was 11 now, tall for her age, with her mother's smile and what I liked to think was my sense of humor. We'd do homework at the kitchen table on Friday nights, order pizza, and watch old episodes of The Office while she laughed at jokes she was probably too young to fully understand. Her mother, Diane, had remarried last year. The guy's name was Chris, and he seemed fine. He coached youth soccer. He had a boat. Diane had sent me photos from their wedding at Germantown Country Club. I looked at them once and then deleted them. I had friends. Not close friends, but the kind of friends you have when you're an adult and friendship requires scheduling. There was Marcus, yes, another Marcus, from college who worked in tech and was always talking about some startup. There was my brother Deshaun, who lived in Nashville and sold insurance and called me every Sunday to check in. There was my mother in Atlanta, who worried about everything and called me baby, even though I was 42 years old. Life was fine. It was the kind of fine that sounds boring when you say it out loud, but feels like a luxury when you're living it. Stability. Respect at work, or what I thought was respect. A routine that made sense. A future that seemed mapped out. And then, in the 3rd week of March, things started feeling slightly off. Not obviously wrong, just off. It started with a phone call from my workplace. Richard wanted to meet with me on a Friday afternoon. Nothing urgent, he said, just wanted to touch base. But Friday afternoon meetings are never casual, and I spent the whole day feeling like something was slightly out of alignment, like a picture frame that's tilted just a degree off from straight. When I got to his office, Richard was sitting behind his desk with his hands clasped, and there was a woman in a gray suit sitting next to him. "Marcus, this is Linda Chen from our compliance department," Richard said, not meeting my eyes. "We need to talk about some irregularities in your client accounts." My heart did something strange, not the dramatic movie kind of skip, but a slow, sickening sink, like an elevator dropping 1 floor. "What kind of irregularities?" I asked. "Unauthorized transfers," Linda said. She had a file open on her lap. Over the past 8 months, there have been 17 transfers totaling approximately $140,000 moving from client accounts into a personal account registered under your name. I felt the room tilt. "That's not possible," I said. I would never. We're not accusing you of anything yet," Richard said, finally looking at me. But there was something in his eyes. Pity, maybe. Or the look of someone who'd already decided what he believed. But we have to suspend your access to all client accounts effective immediately. We're going to have to notify the SEC. And obviously, you should probably get a lawyer. I left that office feeling like I was walking through water. The whole building suddenly felt hostile. The way people looked at me as I packed my desk. The whispers I could almost hear, but not quite. By the time I got to my car, my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't get the key in the ignition. It didn't make sense. I knew exactly how much money was in every account I managed. I knew what I had access to. And I knew, with absolute crystal clarity, that I had never, not once, transferred a single dollar that didn't belong to me. Someone had done this. Someone had framed me. But I had no idea who or why. And that not knowing was worse than the accusation itself. It was like waking up in the middle of a story and realizing you'd missed the first act. The threat was already in motion. The trap was already closing. And I was still stupid enough to think I could explain my way out of it. I sat in my attorney's office on a Tuesday morning in September, 6 months after that gas station arrest, watching Linda Chen's face go pale as she read the email on her own screen. Her hands were shaking. Mine were steady. That was the difference between us now. She was the one who was about to lose everything. "This isn't possible," Linda whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the air conditioning. She kept scrolling, kept reading, kept hoping the evidence would somehow rearrange itself into a different story. It wouldn't. My lawyer, James Richardson, sat across from me with his fingers steepled, waiting. He'd been waiting for this moment since I'd first walked into his office in late March, broke and desperate, and facing federal charges. James was the kind of black man who'd spent 30 years climbing out of holes worse than mine, and he never looked surprised when the world tried to put you back in one. He just smiled quietly and got to work. "Tell me again what you found," James said to me, not to Linda. He wanted to hear it one more time before we walked into the courthouse across the street. I'd been through the numbers 100 times. I knew every transaction, every routing code, every digital fingerprint. But saying it aloud, in front of Linda, still felt like the moment the trap was closing around her instead of me. "The transfers didn't come from my accounts," I said carefully, each word measured. "They came from a second administrative account that only she could access, the one Richard set up for her when she was promoted to compliance oversight 2 years ago. She had the passwords, she had the authority, and for 8 months she used both to move money into accounts registered under my name, then transferred it out again through cryptocurrency exchanges she set up under shell corporations registered in Delaware." Linda's head snapped toward me. "That's a lie." "I never—" "The IP addresses match your home computer," James interrupted, sliding a printout across the table. "Your office computer, your personal laptop. We have timestamps on every login. We have surveillance footage from the server room showing you accessing the physical hardware. We have emails from you to cryptocurrency exchanges using your personal account. We have the bank records showing where the money went after it left those shell companies. And we have your own audit trail, which you failed to cover because you thought no one would look at the compliance officer's credentials." Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish. The color didn't just drain from her face, it seemed to drain from her entire body, leaving her looking like something hollow and inflated. "I want my lawyer," she said finally. "You should have wanted him 6 months ago," I said quietly. The thing is, I'd spent that entire time not knowing if I was going to prison. The SEC investigation had ground forward with bureaucratic indifference. The firm's lawyers had their own lawyers. Richard Hartley had disappeared into the middle distance of corporate non-accountability, neither fired nor promoted, just shuffled sideways into a consulting role where he'd never have to make a decision again. But Linda had underestimated something crucial. I had nothing to lose. After they'd suspended my access and notified the authorities, I'd done the one thing a man with a ruined reputation and nothing left to hide could do. I'd hired James Richardson with my last $30,000, and I'd started digging. Not to prove my innocence, that was easy. I'd never been guilty. I'd dug to find out who was guilty and why they'd chosen to destroy me instead of finding another way. It took 3 weeks of records requests and subpoenas and conversations with IT people who felt bad for me. It took another 2 weeks of following the money through exchanges and shell corporations and cryptocurrency wallets. And then, one Thursday evening in my apartment, drinking cold brew at my kitchen window, the same ritual I'd kept for all those mornings before everything fell apart, I found it. Not the whole picture, just one thread. Linda Chen had a gambling problem, not the casual kind. The kind where you've lost $300,000 in 8 months, and your ex-husband is threatening to take your daughter, and your credit cards are maxed out, and you're 3 days away from losing the co-op apartment in Brooklyn that your inheritance paid for. The kind where you're looking at your career, your reputation, your entire adult life imploding, and you think maybe, just maybe, if you could shift the blame to someone else, if you could make the numbers not add up in a way that pointed to you, if you could get lucky one more time. She'd started small, 5,000 here, 10 there, moving money through my accounts because I was high enough on the totem pole that I could theoretically access everything, but not so high that anyone was watching me constantly. And then, when that worked, when a month went by and no one noticed, she'd gotten bolder. She'd found a cryptocurrency exchange that lets you move money fast and dirty. She'd opened shell companies. She'd set up back channels. She'd gambled with the firm's money, lost, and then gambled with more to try to win it back. By the time the auditors noticed the discrepancies, she'd already decided who would take the fall. I would have gone to prison. 6 to 10 years, probably. First-time federal offense, but the amount was substantial. I would have lost my house, my job, my relationship with my daughter. Zoe would have grown up knowing her father was a thief. I would have come out the other side of prison a completely different man, if I came out at all. But Linda had made one mistake. She'd been so focused on making sure the transfers looked like they came from me that she'd forgotten to cover her own footprints. She'd used her own computer to set up the shell corporations. She'd logged into the cryptocurrency exchanges from her home IP address. She'd even, and this was the kind of mistake that only someone truly desperate and stupid makes, sent herself a reminder email about the passwords, which she then accidentally included in a backup file that got archived. When James and I presented the evidence to the SEC, to the FBI, to the federal prosecutors, they didn't even hesitate. The case against me evaporated like morning fog. By September, the case against Linda was so airtight that her own lawyer was already negotiating her plea deal. But that Tuesday morning meeting in my attorney's office wasn't about the legal system. It was about something older and more direct than that. It was about the moment when someone realizes that the person they thought they'd destroyed has been watching them the whole time, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to strike. "You're going to testify," I said to Linda, leaning forward slightly. "You're going to tell the SEC exactly how you did it, exactly why you did it, and exactly how you tried to frame me. And then, when they're done with you, you're going to spend the next 10 to 15 years in federal prison, and you're going to do it knowing that I walked free." Linda's hands were on the table. I could see them shaking. She was crying now, silently, the kind of crying that doesn't make any noise because you're too shocked to produce sound. "My daughter," she whispered. "I'll lose my daughter." "You lost her when you decided to frame an innocent man," I said. And I meant it. "You lost her when you thought destroying my life was easier than facing your own problems." James put a hand on my arm, not to stop me, but to signal that we were done. We'd gotten what we came for. Linda's confession, her panic, her understanding of what was about to happen to her. That was the moment. Everything else was just procedure. We stood up. James gathered his files. I looked at Linda one more time. She was staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else, like she couldn't quite understand how they'd betrayed her so thoroughly. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. A kind of cold pity. She'd been desperate, and desperation had made her stupid, and stupidity had made her a criminal. And now she was going to lose everything. It was the exact trajectory I would have followed if things had gone the other way. The only difference between us was luck, and timing, and a lawyer who didn't give up. 3 weeks later, I stood in a federal courthouse in Memphis, wearing a suit I'd bought specifically for the occasion, watching Linda Chen enter a guilty plea on 7 counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and theft. The judge, a woman named Patricia Morrison, black, probably in her mid-60s, with the kind of face that had seen 1,000 versions of this exact story, accepted the plea without comment. The sentencing hearing was set for December. Linda's lawyer requested she remain free on bail pending sentencing. The prosecutor objected. The judge granted bail, but revoked Linda's passport and confined her to Tennessee. As Linda was led out of the courtroom by the U.S. Marshals, she caught my eye for just a moment. There was no defiance in that look, no anger. Just the hollow understanding of someone who'd finally realized that actions have consequences, and consequences have teeth. The firm settled with me out of court for $2.3 million. I didn't negotiate hard. I just wanted it over. The settlement came with an NDA. I couldn't talk about what happened, but I could leave with money, with my name cleared, with my life back in whatever form it could take after 6 months of destruction. Richard Hartley called me personally to apologize. His voice was careful, measured, the way powerful men sound when they're afraid of lawsuits. I listened to him stumble through his non-apology apology, and then I hung up without saying goodbye. Some conversations don't deserve closure. Some people don't deserve to know if you've forgiven them. But here's the thing that nobody tells you about vindication. It doesn't feel the way you think it will. I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times during those 6 months of waiting, those endless nights when I couldn't sleep and couldn't stop thinking about Linda Chen moving money through shell corporations while I was trying to figure out how to afford a good lawyer. I'd imagined it would feel like victory, like triumph, like justice finally working the way it was supposed to. It didn't feel like that at all. It felt empty. I was standing in my new apartment in downtown Memphis, nicer than the old one, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the river, on a Tuesday in November, making cold brew at 5:30 in the morning, and I realized something. The morning ritual was the same. The coffee was the same. But I wasn't the same man who'd been standing at that gas station window 6 months ago with a police officer's knee in his back. That man had believed in the system. He'd believed that truth was enough. He'd believed that if you worked hard and followed the rules and kept your record clean, the world would reward you with stability and respect. That man had been naive, and the world had tried to kill him for it. The man standing at the window now was different. He was harder. He was colder. He didn't believe in the system anymore. He understood it now, the way a prey animal understands a predator. He knew that justice didn't come naturally. It had to be hunted. It had to be built with evidence and patience and money, and a lawyer willing to work without a guarantee of success. My phone buzzed. A text from Zoe. "Dad, can I come this weekend?" Mom says yes. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Zoe was 12 now. She was tall, getting taller, with her mother's smile and, I hoped, my stubbornness. The past 6 months had been hard on her. Diane had told her the basics, that I was having some problems at work, that it was being sorted out, that it wasn't my fault. Kids are smart, though. Kids know when the adults around them are terrified, even if no one says it out loud. "Of course," I texted back. "Pizza and the office?" "Yes," came the response, with 3 fire emojis. I set the phone down and looked out at the city waking up. Somewhere out there, Linda Chen was sitting in whatever apartment she was still renting, waiting for her sentencing hearing, knowing that her daughter wasn't going to visit her, that her career was over, that the next decade of her life was going to be a very small room with very limited options. And I realized that I didn't hate her anymore. Hate requires energy, and energy requires belief that the other person matters. Linda had stopped mattering to me the moment I'd found that first piece of evidence. What I felt was something colder than hate. It was the absence of feeling. It was the understanding that some people burn their own lives down and then try to pull you into the fire with them. And if you're smart and lucky and willing to do the work, you can step out of the flames and watch them burn alone. I finished my coffee and got ready for work. I had a new job now, at a different firm, with different people, in a different building. The pay was better. The hours were the same. The risk was always going to be there, though. You could never completely eliminate it. Somewhere, someone would always be desperate enough to try to use you as a ladder to climb out of their own hole. The only thing you could do was stay aware, stay careful, and keep detailed records. The city looked beautiful that morning. The sun was coming up over the Mississippi, turning the water gold, and people were starting their days. And somewhere, Linda Chen was counting down the days until her sentencing hearing. And I was going to have pizza with my daughter on Friday night. And we were going to watch The Office. and for a few hours, I was going to remember what it felt like to be happy without irony, without the shadow of what had almost happened looming over everything. That was the real victory, I think. Not the money, not the vindication, not the knowledge that Linda was going to prison. It was that I was still standing, still breathing, still capable of joy in small moments with people I loved. I locked the apartment door behind me and headed to work, and I didn't look back.